My friends, what's up? Welcome to the channel. It's me from the Modern Stoic. And today we are continuing our series on Stoic quotes, these 100 little nuggets that I have written about from Seneca to Epictetus, Musonius Rufus to Marcus Aurelius. We are getting through them one by one. Today it is time for a quote from Zeno of Citium, and this is one that I think about all the time. Every storm ends. Prepare yourself, not the weather. Now, you may have heard some other versions of this quote out there. I like this one best. I think it comes from one of William Irvine's books, but I could be wrong about that. If you know where this quote comes from in a work by Zeno, please let me know in the comments below. But here it is, and again, every storm ends. Prepare yourself, not the weather. So we're looking at two very different things with this quote. First, the ending of the storm, and second, preparing ourselves for the storms that inevitably come in life. This is something that I think about often with my own kids, right? As I watch them grow up, they get older. They face new challenges. They're going to get out in the world. I want to prepare them for the storms that they will encounter. But then also, we're living in the midst of a storm now, right? And so how do we think about the end of the storm? Is it around the corner? When will it be over? What will that look like when it ends? Let's break it down piece by piece. First, every storm ends. And this is just an absolute truth, right? It's always true that a storm will end. You're standing there in the rain. Just wait long enough and the sun will come back out. The clouds will clear, right? But also, I think he's talking about more than just literal storms, right? He's talking about any kind of storm that comes into your life. A disagreement with a friend, a disagreement with a partner, a challenge at work, a professional setback, the death of someone close to us. All of those are storms, and every single one of them will end. Every single one of them will pass. No matter how much the storm rages, no matter how dark it seems, no matter how loud the thunder is, no matter how much lightning is flashing, it will end. And most of the time it will end sooner than you think. So never lose sight of that. Keep that in mind. Every storm eventually ends. Now, in the midst of the storm, that can be hard to see. So you have to prepare yourself for that. That's the second part of the quote, and we can talk about preparing ourselves in two ways here. First, preparing ourselves for the inevitable storms that will come in our life. And second, preparing ourselves for the aftermath of the storm, for the fact that once the storm passes, the sun will come back out. But you might not be ready for it. So you need to prepare for that too. Well, preparing ourselves for future storms, right? Preparing ourselves for the inevitable challenges that will come our way. That means having the right mindset, having a philosophy that we can rely upon, having practices that we can turn to. For me, that's been Stoicism. I've talked about that a lot here on this channel. You've probably heard me talk about the practices of Stoicism before. I've written about them in my book, The Daily Stoic. But it's not just having a philosophy or having a set of practices. It's also understanding what you control and what you don't control. And this is something that the Stoics talk about a lot. So many of the things that come our way, many of the things that cause these storms in our lives, we don't actually have control over. Things we do have control over is how we respond to them, how we think about them, whether we make them bigger in our minds than they really are, whether we try to make sense of them, whether we choose to look for the lessons in them, whether we choose to do what we can and then let go of the rest. So that's part of preparing ourselves. Having a philosophy, having a mindset, having a practice. I also think it means preparing ourselves by doing what we can in the moment. When the storm hits, when things are happening, we have to do what we can to address it. I remember the first time I ever experienced a big snowstorm, right? I grew up in Southern California. I moved to New York City and I was like, whoa, people are freaking out because it's snowing. They're like, oh my gosh, it's never gonna stop. This is crazy. People were like canceling their plans, closing down their offices early, stocking up on food. And I remember just thinking, well, I guess I'll just shovel the sidewalk in front of the house. I guess I'll take care of my stuff and I'll see how it goes. And that's what we have to do in these storms. We have to see what's in our control and do it. I love that great line from Robert Greene in his book, The 48 Laws of Power. He says, never outshine the master. In the midst of a crisis, never volunteer for more work than you can handle. Draw a line. Know where your limits are, know what your capacity is, and focus on doing those things. Don't be a hero, don't be a fool, and don't volunteer for more than you can actually deliver. Do what you can and then focus on that. And that's how you prepare for the storms, by practicing that over and over again. But I also think he's talking about something else when he says, prepare yourself. He's talking about being prepared for when the storm passes, right? Because sometimes when the storm passes, when the challenges are over, when the obstacles are gone, it can leave us in a vulnerable place. We can feel shaken, we can feel depleted, we can feel scared about what's next, we can feel lost about what happens now. Remember that when the sun comes back out after a storm, it can be blinding, right? It can be really bright and sudden. So if you've been in the dark clouds and the rain and the wind for a while, when that sun comes out, you might not be able to see. So we have to prepare ourselves for that transition too. And I think that's one of the things that Stoicism helps us with, is that we're always trying to get better. We're always trying to improve. We're always trying to be ready for what's next. We know what happened before isn't necessarily a guarantee of what's going to happen in the future, and we should always be prepared for that. The other thing that I think about with this quote, and I mentioned this in the book The Daily Stoic, is that we need to recognize the limits of our perception, right? When we're in the middle of a storm, we think it's never going to end. We can't see beyond the clouds. We can't see what's on the other side of the mountain. We can only see what's right in front of us, and so we have to remind ourselves of that. Whenever we see someone who's successful, whenever we see someone who's happy, we assume they always felt that way, right? But they didn't. They had storms in their past. They have storms in their present. They will have storms in their future. And so we have to remember that and prepare ourselves for the possibility that someday our ship will come in, that someday the sun will shine, that someday things will be okay again. But we need to prepare ourselves for that possibility. This is such a powerful quote. And when I hear this quote, I think of so many things that I've seen in my lifetime, so many situations that I've experienced myself where I was in the middle of a storm and I couldn't see anything, right? And I couldn't tell whether it would end in an hour or 5 years. But now looking back on it, it's clear that it did end. And it ended sooner than I thought. And I'm grateful for that. I hope you think about that in the midst of your own storms. And I hope that you remember that every storm ends. Prepare yourself, not the weather. My friends, thank you so much for joining us here on the channel. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Comment below with some thoughts on this quote. What does it mean to you? How have you applied it in your life? Ask any questions that you have about Stoic philosophy. Always remember, you are the weather. I'll see you soon.